I'm joined right now by an extremely important guest. Attorney Carl Schwartz joins me. Mr. Schwartz, how are you today?
I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
I'm very well. I'm excited to have you on the show. Just about a week ago, we had Tina Forte with us, and I wanted to get a better understanding of this legal action. We know that Andrew Cuomo, in his capacity as governor, is immune from civil lawsuits, but this Article 78 action that you've brought, it's not a standard lawsuit. Can you explain it for us so that everybody first understands what's going on, and then we'll get into what's been happening?
Yeah, so an Article 78 is a type of lawsuit where you're not seeking monetary damages at the conclusion of the litigation. What you're seeking is to cause a government official to do one of two things: either stop doing something that you think they shouldn't be doing, or to have a court order them to start doing something that they should be doing that they're not. Either way. And so in these perilous times that we find ourselves in, where the government has essentially created so many draconian rules that are so arbitrary and so capricious, my position with clients and potential clients was, listen, there will come a day when various plaintiffs will file the normal lawsuits seeking damages because they've really been damaged. For example, like, say, landlords with a Fifth Amendment takings argument and losing all their rent. There will be lawsuits by landlords eventually to get that rent money back. But in the meantime, this lawsuit says, listen, we're not there yet. We haven't even sustained all the losses yet. We haven't even lost all the business that we're going to lose. What we're doing right now with this action is calling the question right now and saying to the governor and Commissioner Zucker and some other defendants, depending where you are, we've got Mayor de Blasio named and the Chancellor of the New York City Schools in our Richmond lawsuit. What we're saying is enough is enough. It is time for you to get our kids back to school. It is time for you to stop playing these games with our business owners and let us get back on our feet.
Absolutely. And we had a conversation with New York Teachers for Choice just the other day. They've also brought a separate Article 78 lawsuit. They're concerned about this, they're mandating teachers to be tested, and there's a lot of information that causes people to believe that New York State might even mandate every single resident to get this vaccine. This vaccine's famously been rushed through at warp speed, no animal testing. It's a messenger RNA vaccine that works dramatically differently than any inoculation prior to this. People are concerned that it's a bit of an experiment. So what you're doing is separate from the teachers, but what is it specifically that you're trying to compel the governor to do or not do?
Well, so what we're asking the court to do, frankly, is to strip the governor of the emergency powers. And while that sounds outlandish to people who sort of drank the Kool-Aid on this thing and just think that we're in a worse place today with COVID-19 than we were back in March and April, the reality is we have evidence. We've got a team of medical doctors that have put together information for this litigation. And we think when that information is brought to bear as evidence in a court of record and a judge takes a look at it, the judge is just gonna be overwhelmed with how much the public has been misinformed and how much the standard media outlets have played to that misinformation.
Yeah, I mean, I had received a document earlier today where somebody put in a FOIA request to the governor's office asking for any information or evidence that they have dealing with the efficacy of using masks to prevent the spread of, viral influenza or COVID-19 or something like that. They said they had no information whatsoever to respond to the FOIA request. Now, Andrew Cuomo frequently goes on television and tells everybody to listen to the science, but when we ask him to present evidence of this alleged science, it appears that there's none.
That's exactly right. And I say, how is it that we the people, right, get it right time and time and time again, despite what we're told by experts, right? And you know, if it only happened ever so rarely, we wouldn't be skeptical like we are. But the reality is, you know, we the people have been so right on so many issues where our governing leaders have told us how imperative something is, and you know, you find out later, no, there was no evidence for that. There was no scientific basis for that. You know, do mask work? Well, yeah, mask work to keep like hair from falling into food while you're preparing somebody's sandwich in a diner or something. You know, if you're the medical doctor and you got somebody opened up on the gurney, yeah, you wear a mask. It keeps your hair from going in there. But you know, the experts tell you, you know, it's like, you know, thinking you're going to stop the COVID-19 virus with a mask like we're wearing, it's like thinking a volleyball net is going to stop BBs from going
Right.
through it, right?
Yeah.
It's outlandish. And the question is, are we as Americans, based on the whim, the arbitrary and capricious whim of our governing leaders, willing to say, I'm willing to walk around masked up all the time? Just because you say, well, if it helps even a little, isn't it worth doing? And I'm like, no, not so much. Not this boy. I'm a patriot. I don't believe in this stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, if it helps a little bit, isn't it worth doing? I mean, this is not the nature of the argument. What we're talking about is the existence of the Constitution that protects our rights, and then the introduction of these, you know, false notions. I mean, we've spoken about it ad nauseum here on Crowdsource the Truth, but this is not scientific. We've got people sealed in these plastic enclosures, certainly no air circulating in there. I would think there's a lot of things that could fester, and bacteria and viral infections that could grow in there. There's rats all around New York City, homeless people entering some of these things at night. We have no idea that this is some sort of a sterile environment. As you point out, these masks are designed for surgery, to be used by doctors for limited amounts of time in a limited environment in a mostly sterile surgical theater. You start taking this thing outside, scratching your face, taking it off to yell at people at a Black Lives Matter rally, putting it back on. It is totally ineffective. And what it is doing is it's allowing them to prevent people from entering retail stores. We heard a story about a family being kicked off of United Airlines permanently because a 2-year-old didn't want to wear the mask. And it's getting everybody ready for this sort of mass control. Just this week, we've had the first inoculations begin under this vaccine. There's a lot of talk. The Bar Association has issued some kind of statement that they're all for mandatory vaccinations. No offense, you're an attorney, of course, but when you need a medical opinion, do you ask your colleagues in the legal profession, or do you consult a doctor?
Yeah, it is the heights of just arrogance that these people take positions like that. They are not in a position where they should have any opinion at all on that issue. And as Americans, with all the rights that we have in our Constitution, we should be standing up to this nonsense and demanding. And that's what's going to happen in this litigation. We're going to get in the courtroom and we're going to start putting professionals on the stand, and they're going to testify to what has scientific evidence behind it and what doesn't. And if the AG's office, on behalf of the governor and Commissioner Zucker, thinks they're going to overcome that, they're going to have to put an expert on the stand that's going to differ with our experts. And I'll tell you what, I look forward to that cross-examination.
And has Attorney General Letitia James been helpful in this process, or has her office done anything so far?
Well, so recently, when they realized, this goes back a couple of weeks, that I was filing lawsuits all over the state. I mean, at first they saw 1, 2, 3, and 4 or 5 maybe, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, we've got lawsuits. Mr. Schwartz is filing lawsuits everywhere, and there's just potential for all sorts of conflicts and findings and rulings of the courts across the state. And this does not make for good, judicial rulings. So we better get control of this. And they prepared a motion to consolidate all of the lawsuits. I have 12 that have been filed, 11 that are officially served. And we just argued the motion for consolidation of those lawsuits this morning. And they're wanting to consolidate them into the county where I filed the first action, which is my own case in Yates County of upstate New York in the middle of the Finger Lakes. So if Letitia James is successful in this filing that she's put together, then Mayor de Blasio and the Chancellor and the Long Island crowd and in Rockland County, Onondaga County being Syracuse, all those cases are going to be brought to the 4th Department in upstate New York and decided by one judge in Yates County.
But that sounds like something that they would want to do to quickly dispose of all the cases, rather than have all these opportunities for them to be carefully scrutinized under different circumstances by different judges.
Yes, and that was my argument to the judge. I'm like, listen, I guarantee you, whether you like Mayor de Blasio or don't like Mayor de Blasio, I will guarantee you that there are issues in New York City that need to be addressed legally that aren't going to look anything like what I've got out here in Yates County, where I've got lots of grapes and wineries and cows.
Yeah. And I mean, this is the game that's frequently played, right? They'll put things in the newspaper talking about lawsuits being dismissed. And, there's a lot of, I think the average person doesn't have a very good understanding of the law, how litigation works, what lawyers do, and just all the politics and the gamesmanship involved in getting any kind of litigation over the line. It's a substantial challenge, and you've created a GoFundMe page where people can help you with some of the costs, obviously travel, your staff. This is difficult work, and people can look for the normalization of in-school education, the NOISE campaign. If you just Google Carl Schwartz noise campaign GoFundMe, you'll find it. And people who are watching who want to support Mr. Schwartz in his effort to compel the government to do what it is supposed to do can financially contribute on this webpage right here. Now, Mr. Schwartz, why is it called the normalization of in-school education? Students, I mean, that used to be normal to go to school to get educated. Where did this come from?
Yeah, so I did not actually happen upon this group until I had been working with a group that found me out of Rochester, which is about an hour's drive north from where I live and practice law predominantly. That group is called ROC, like for Rochester, ROC for Educational Freedom. They learned of the NOISE group downstate, and they shared in common that they're groups of concerned parents that want our children back to school without these draconian and ridiculous rules, which have no scientific data behind them at all, right? So they'd been working on this since April, as I understand it, and had set up the fund, set up the websites. They were looking for an attorney that would bring the action. Apparently, they were unsuccessful in that all through the spring and summer months. And just as the school year was about to start, they learned about me because we had a case regarding our son who's autistic, who'd lost his medical exemption from vaccinations last summer when the governor went in and got that statute without the legislature being involved at all.
Wow.
And so the effect of these kids being thrown out of school this year, practically speaking, was something I experienced last fall and had to sue the governor over and Commissioner Zucker and actually ultimately won that case. And as a result of that case, people were aware that I was out here and that I was not afraid to file an action against our governor and Commissioner Zucker, and ultimately ended up doing so. So these are important groups. These are people who care about our kids. and wanting to get them back to school. And these folks know that the legislature has kind of lost control of this governor. I mean, they gave him certain emergency powers, but they did not give him the powers he has exercised. And I've gotten that right from the legislators. And in my litigation, I have 2 exhibits which are from the actual legislature, where they say, here is our list from our attorney of over 200 violations of our state and federal constitutional and statutory rights by the defendants, the governor and Commissioner Zucker. So that is how real this thing is, this lawsuit, that it's the legislature itself that's saying, listen, go, go, go. You can't do this thing if you don't get into court and overcome it, because we've lost control of it ourselves. So the funding of this and going to GoFundMe and supporting it with dollars is critically important, because I'm not charging this thing out and billing attorney fees and all that. This is a critical time in our state and nation's history, and we need lawyers and everybody else in all their different ways to step up and do what they can do to make this happen. But I'll tell you, it takes money to serve the papers. It takes money to print the papers. This lawsuit is like an inch thick, and we have to make many copies of it and serve it in all different ways. And there's just a lot of cost involved. So we are stretching the dollars every which way we can to make this litigation happen. But we do need people to step up and support it and say, yes, this is important. We've got to get our schools back to normal so that our kids can get in there and really learn.
It's a very important thing for people to support. And I mean, the costs go beyond just printing papers and the things that you're talking about. Obviously, if your time is occupied doing this type of Article 78 petition, you're not able to take on other legal clients. You've got your office expenses, your employee expenses, you're traveling around to go to these hearings, and they are happening all over the state. So when I had spoken with Tina last week, she was quite enthusiastic that the governor had finally been served. He's not complying with this. It's not like there's some complicated thing that causes him to have to do this and now some conflict has come up, so he's being cooperative. He's deliberately trying to avoid this lawsuit, isn't he?
He definitely is. And, when we first sent out the first action several months ago, we use professional process servers that are in Albany already, so it's easy. They can we send an email, they print our action, and they walk across the street, right, and into the Capitol building, where suing your government official who's a legitimate government leader should be as easy as saying, hello, I'm here to serve the governor's office or the commissioner's office, and that should be it, right? Well, that's not it. So all of a sudden, we're getting, all these invoices coming back for hundreds of dollars because they showed up, they went there, they attempted the service, and we're told, no, the building's shut down due to COVID. We're not accepting service. And I found out about it. I said, listen, that's not legit. You press it. So they went back and they pressed it. And by pressing it, they were told to go to another building, to the Albany room. And they went there about 20, 25 minutes later. And when they got there, they found that, nope, the governor's not allowing himself to be served, or Commissioner Zucker. That's it. No service. So we missed a deadline that a judge gave us, a couple of them actually, for getting the defendants served. And it ticked me off. And we then had a court conference, and I've got the AG's office saying, that is ridiculous. No, that is not legitimate. And we are not running from the law. And I'm like, you know what, Judge, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I live a long way from Albany, frankly. It's like 4 hours drive, but I'm going to drive it. I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to drive to the Capitol building. And I'm going to walk in there just like I do every other day, all suited up, ready to go as an officer of the courts. And I'm going to have my lawsuits ready. And that's what happened a week ago Friday. I literally took 5 of these lawsuits, 5 for the governor, 5 for the commissioner. That's a real stack of paper. It's almost half a case of paper. And I go walking into the Capitol building, and they're like, sir, the building's closed. I'm like, no, it's obviously not. everybody's in here working. You're just keeping out who you want to keep out.
Right.
Like, well, sir, you can't serve process. I'm like, I got news for you. I am not leaving until this action is served. And I refused. I stood right there and got strong. And then finally, 10 minutes later, I was able to serve the papers on the governor.
Very well done. I mean, it's shameful how the guy hides behind these, procedural elements. He knows that if he delays you, it costs you money. He did something extremely objectionable at one of his Emmy award-winning press conferences just a week ago or something like that. And it's my understanding that he's holding these press conferences in the building that you're describing. So somehow somebody is getting in there. It's a disgrace that he's won an Emmy Award. He's the first sitting politician to ever be given that award, and the television academies are tax exempt. So our tax dollars subsidize their activities, including awarding this guy for all of this objectionable stuff. But during one of his press conferences, he was asked about restaurateur, bar owner Danny Presti, the guy who is one of the owners of Mac's Public House in Staten Island. Perhaps you've heard about this guy. They've been standing up to the COVID lockdowns. The governor said that Presti had assaulted 2 uniformed NYPD officers, and he stressed that they were NYPD officers. Now, this is totally false. NYPD has confirmed to me that they weren't involved in the arrest at all. But the governor is also a lawyer. He's got a JD. He knows the law. He knows that as the governor, he is explicitly exempt from any, he's immune to any civil lawsuits for defamation or lies. So when he engages in a lie like that, he's able to take advantage of the public smear that makes it difficult for Danny Presti to get public support and raise funds, but there's no consequences for him.
Well, I'll tell you, I am doing research on this because these are unprecedented times. We have never experienced anything of a taking of our rights as American citizens as what we're facing right now. Nothing even close to it. And so the law that most people would sue under for damages that we've experienced for the last probably 100.5 years or more, I told the judge this morning. I said, listen, I'm coming into your courtroom with some new legal theories, because unprecedented times calls for unprecedented procedures, and I'm going to ask you to make findings. If a governing leader acts in such a way, even though they're in their official capacity, that it's grossly negligent, it grossly disregards the potential for loss of life, that say children are committing suicide because they can't handle the school structure the way it is and not being in school right now, and this information and you sit on this information and then you just say, well, I'm exempt. Well, you know what? I'm going to ask a judge to pierce that exemption because your conduct is so grossly negligent. It rises to a level of recklessness that you should be held to account for your actions. And so, the governor should be very careful about that. This lawsuit we have filed is what I called my gentlemanly lawsuit, right? It just says, stop it. Just stop, right? We're going back to school. We're going back to work. We're all essential. This essential people versus non-essential people, that is awful. That is just arrogant people talking and trying to hold themselves out as being more important than other human beings. I got news for you. God created the human beings, and we're all important and we're all essential, and that's a fact. And he better get used to that, because that's the fact. And we, the people, are going to rectify this thing, and we're going to get back to work. And we're not going to allow them to tell us what we're going to do with vaccines and how far apart we're going to sit in tables and stuff. We understand risk as Americans. We get in cars every day where that's the greatest risk we face all day long. Right? We're in a car where I could die today. And that's the highest likelihood of death I've got, right? So am I at risk of other things? Could I get COVID-19? Sure. What's the math say? Well, the math says if I get COVID-19, I'm 55 years old. Even if I get sick, I'm not dying. I'm not. Now, if I have some underlying condition that's really bad and I'm concerned, well, then I can choose to wear some mask. And I'll tell you, it wouldn't be the cheesy ones that they're trying to make the rest of us wear. It'd be a real mask like painters wear in the paint booth, right? Or stay home or really protect yourself. That's the discussion we need to be having. You don't protect the strong from the weak. You protect the weak from the strong. So those of us who are strong need to go to work and earn the money and pay the bills and buy the food and bring it, right? And for those who are weak, we need to find out ways of securing them so that they're not as at risk. And that's how this thing ought to work. When this all started, I'm a Rotarian in Penn Yan here. And we had a program that we did where we'd go out and buy all the supplies that the people who worked in our nursing homes would need, so that they didn't have to go after they'd be in the nursing home all day. They wouldn't have to go into the stores, right? Because in my little county of Yates County, we've only had 7 people die of COVID-19 or with COVID-19. All of them were in the same nursing home. Huh. So we essentially just created almost a moat around that nursing home as Rotarians. And we raised money. We bought all the supplies that the personnel there needed. And we brought it to them and we left it just inside the door. And that was it. And it worked great. And it kept us protected at a time when COVID-19 had a really nasty bite to it back in March and April. And I just think that's how we need to be thinking about this. That's how we need to be protecting people, protecting the ill, the infirm, those who might have real difficult medical circumstances, and let the rest of us assume the risk. We're happy to do so. I'd rather die than to wear these masks. I'd rather die than to have to speak as a lawyer in a court of law with something over my face. It just is what it is. And if somebody else wants to get the COVID-19 vaccine, great. If they're afraid, you get the vaccine. I don't want to get the vaccine. You shouldn't be able to force me to get it. If you want it, you should get it, right?
I agree completely. I'm really so pleased that Tina Forte has introduced us, Mr. Schwartz, because I agree with everything that you're saying. And I've been looking for someone like you, a lawyer with the ability to really hold these politicians to task. Now, during our interview last week, one of the things that Tina shared with us that was really one of the most bizarre and disturbing aspects of this whole entire ordeal, she got COVID-19, and she's young and very strong. Thank God she recovered. But she wanted to take hydroxychloroquine when she first found out that she had it. Now, this is not an experimental drug. It's been widely prescribed for 50 or 60 years. There is a very good and broad understanding of its efficacy and its dangers and how well received it is by a lot of people. But yet, this was an unprecedented move. Governor Andrew Cuomo, who is not a medical doctor, although he is an Emmy Award winner, he decided that nobody is allowed to prescribe hydroxychloroquine, despite the fact that we have this right to try law, where someone with a ostensibly fatal disease, like they were trying to tell us COVID-19 was, they have the right to try some sort of experimental treatment because the thought process is they're going to die anyway. What legal basis, medical basis, scientific, logical basis did the governor have for doing this type of unprecedented medical intervention where a dope who knows nothing about medicine is telling doctors what they can do relative to their patients, like Tina Forte?
Well, so for starters, let me say meeting Tina Forte was a true pleasure. I had never met her before the meeting that we had there a week ago down in Long Island on Saturday. She was the first speaker. She's definitely the speaker to get your crowd warmed up. She's got a lot of energy. You can't believe she's as old as she is for the energy she's got. And no surprise to me that she fought her way through it under the circumstances and came out successful. But I will say this about the governor. perhaps he was acting as a doctor. Maybe that's why he got the award. He convinced the medical community that he was a doctor, and he could keep somebody in the medical community from prescribing something that they know would help a patient. I will say this, that one's not on the governor. That one to me is on Commissioner Zucker and other members of the medical community that should be in leadership of this state. You know, within each profession, it's the responsibility, though, of those who are at the top of those professions to keep other things in check that would impact a profession in a negative way. You think about it this way. Engineers that make skyscrapers. If some political figure tried to intervene in a process and say, we're not going to use this kind of steel beam here in our state or our city anymore because it's only produced in one place and we don't like those people, and so we're just going to build the skyscrapers and we're not going to use those anymore.
Make it out of ice cream or something,
right? The engineers as a group would say, yeah, whatever. And they go right on using the same steel beams because they are in charge. They control that profession, which means when you and I walk into a building and we get in an elevator, we have that expectation that we're safe as we go flying 38 floors up into a building or something, right?
Yeah.
How is it that we don't have that in the medical community on this whole thing? I don't know the answer to that. I know a lot of doctors run scared. It's part of our lawsuit. There's an entire pediatric group of doctors in the Monroe County area. They had put out an open letter saying our kids need to get back to school. It was like summertime. They were threatened by the health officer of the state and pulled that back off their website in less than 24 hours. We then had another group of doctors that said, listen, this is ridiculous. 24 doctors in the Monroe County area drafted an open letter and signed it and submitted it to interested parties, superintendents, schools, local political figures. And again, the medical officer in the area approached them, put tremendous pressure on them to stand down and retract their words. And thank goodness that group of 24 medical doctors refused. They said, this is where our children need to be. We're the medical doctors. You're not going to tell us how we're going to practice medicine. This is it. And we're leaving it there. And that's what we need to see more of. Zucker needs to get strengthened and get tough and figure out how to stand up to Cuomo.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. I'm seeing a lot of examples of perhaps wrong-headed lawyers getting involved in medical decision-making, and I sort of detect this because we've heard things like, this is settled science, right? But there's no such thing as settled science. Somebody could discover some new type of subatomic particle tomorrow that would reconfigure our understanding of the universe from a scientific standpoint. This notion that something is settled, it really comes from the idea of settled law, because law is a construct of man. And this whole concept of mandatory vaccination first heated up when I interviewed Alan Dershowitz. And it was, in retrospect, kind of strange that he would agree to appear on my relatively tiny talk show when he goes on Fox News and all that. But I've now come to believe that he did it because he wanted to plant a seed, that he wanted people who are listening to alternative news to be exposed to, and that was his opinion based in law, that the state actually has the right under the police powers of the Constitution to forcibly vaccinate someone if the lawmakers of that state have voted that it's going to help. And he relied on the legal precedent that was set by the Supreme Court in Jacobson v. Massachusetts. Now, I don't want to put you on the spot. I know lawyers don't like to be asked legal opinions, but the issue that I had with what Mr. Dershowitz said is that the legal opinion was offered on a medical treatment, a vaccination that had been in use for over 100 years. And it also was well understood. There was a wide body of medical knowledge with regard to its efficacy and its safety. But now, in 2020, we're faced with this totally new type of vaccine that they're admitting to us hasn't been tested even as much as an ordinary vaccine would be tested, let alone being in general use for 100 years. But yet, because of this, settled law, as it were, the case law that he refers to in Jacobson v. Massachusetts, Dershowitz thinks it's okay for the state to inject you with whatever the hell they want.
Well, I'll tell you, and I know we will get into some of the finer details of laws as we get into the courtroom with our case and with other cases coming behind it. The idea that the government can force your child to have certain things going into their body, certain procedures happening. I grew up back in the 1980s. In the 90s, and you think back to the HIV issue that was a big deal back then, the HIPAA laws that came out, it's like Congress decided, listen, we need to protect people's rights about their bodies, the things that affect them the most. And one of the things I've argued in this lawsuit is even Roe v. Wade. We always hear Roe v. Wade
My body, my choice.
Right? My body, my choice. And so it's only ever that I know of been argued with regard to the abortion issue. But if in fact that is established case law by the United States Supreme Court, it's my body, my choice. And I don't think our governing leaders get to pick and parse those rights. Either we have that right from Roe v. Wade or we don't. If we have that right from Roe v. Wade, you can't make me put things in my body that I don't want in my body. And I'm asking the court to make that finding.
They also can't force you to use any kind of prophylactic medical measures like wearing the mask, but yet everybody seems to be accepting that. I know you're very busy and I don't want to take too much of your time, but you and I had a brief discussion before we began, and it might be useful for our audience to understand a bit more about how you became interested in some of these legal issues.
Yeah, so it goes back to, and it's you got to hold your seat. It's a bit of a sad story, but it's real, and it's the inspiration behind all of the litigation right now. Okay, so a year ago, I alluded to this earlier, a year ago, following the legislature repealing the religious exemption for vaccines before it left its session in June, immediately following that, apparently Merck paid $48 million over to the governor's capital fund. And in mid-August, Commissioner Zucker instituted all new rules and regulations regarding medical exemptions from vaccines. In effect, gut the statute in its entirety with no legislative input at all, right? So, of course, we didn't know any of this. No, nobody did, right? We're off on vacation in August. You were coming back. School's going to start. And I remember saying to my wife, our little boy he's now 13 years old. So he was almost 12 at the time. I remember saying to my wife a year ago, August, as we're coming back, and we hadn't been with him. The Rotary has a camp for disabled kids up our way. And so he'd been there while the rest of us were able to kind of get a break and go on a vacation. And as we were coming back, I said, listen, this is the first time, I mean, our son Thorne is doing so well in school. I could actually conceive of living with him for the rest of my life. And that's a big deal. I mean, my wife's like, wow. I mean, our house, lots of it is in shambles because of my son. His condition is
he's vaccine injured, right?
We believe so. I didn't know enough to think that even a year ago. I believe that now, frankly. So what happened is, he went to school in the fall session, and he was sent home with, you know, a letter from the school saying that if his vaccines weren't up to date by, you know, next Wednesday, he can't stay in school. And so my wife's like, honey, we just got this letter. I'm like, listen, that's a mistake. Somebody must think we have the religious exemption. We don't. Our son's had the medical exemption for most of his life. I said, just get a hold of the school nurse. I'm sure it's a mistake. So I come home the next day. It was a Friday, and she's like, no, it's not a mistake. And I did what you said. I pressed them as to why, and they just said, because that's the new rule. Well, what new rule, right? Somebody made a new rule. We haven't heard anything about it. Now there's a new rule, right? After, right, all this time. So I said, I'm not going to play around with these guys. You know, I'm not a lawyer for nothing. We went to church Sunday morning. My daughter was serving as a barista. You know, I just went in one of the rooms there, and I sat down on my computer, and I drafted a lawsuit. It was very basic, against the governor and Commissioner Zucker. And I served it. And nobody had any idea about any of this stuff, and until we got to court. And then, you know, the answer to my 3-page lawsuit was like 70 pages long, or very nearly so. And so then, only then was it like, oh, there's a new reg that came out mid-August. Well, so the media started scrambling to figure out what was going on. And that's when they figured out about the payment made by Merck, which makes a lot of the vaccines for these students in school, you know. And we realized at that point I needed somebody that was an expert in vaccines, because I didn't know any of this stuff, right? So we hired Patty Finn from down Rockland County area, and Patty was brilliant. I remained co-counsel with her because I wanted to be able to speak on behalf of my son. And so Patty did her legal work, and I did my stuff. And our son was ordered back to school by a judge the end of January. So he'd been out of school all fall, regressing. It was awful, but he got to go back to school in February. And then now you know the rest of the story. COVID hit.
Wow.
He's back out of school. He's back home. He doesn't understand why. He can't talk. And he's really regressing, right? I mean, it's really awful. And so during COVID, at the end of April, the judge ruled that we had won, that the governor did not have the right as an executive branch member to go in and modify the statute on medical exemptions in the state of New York. He opined if that were to occur, it would be the legislature which would have to refine and define that statute. So we won, right? But we won what? Our son has regressed so much being out of school that we're actually having to place him at this point. So that is a deep and grievous wound for me. And about the time this is happening, the parents of all these kids in our state get a hold of me saying, we cannot find a lawyer that's willing to take on the governor and our kids. I mean, they are in trouble. We have student suicides and suicide attempts that are off the charts right now. And it is awful what we have done. And it is time that we get it rectified. And so that's when I said, listen, I will take up the cause. You know, he cost me my own kid. I don't care now. Now let's do it. Let's start filing lawsuits. If the legislature can't maintain control of this governor through the laws they've made and the emergency powers, then you know what? We're going to pester them and we're going to file legal actions, and we're not going to stop. I said at the rally a week ago, if this governor's lawyers figure out how to dismiss one of my lawsuits, I'll file 3 more in its place. We are not going to stop until we get things back on normal track.
I have to reiterate, I'm so glad that I've met you, Mr. Schwartz, because this is so important to have lawyers who are willing to take this kind of action as you've just described. So many people are concerned about the future of their career if they go up against the governor. There's a ton of people around him who are district attorneys and assistant district attorneys, and you know, it's a treacherous thing to navigate. So it's really important that people who are watching and want to support what you're doing look for the Noise campaign on GoFundMe. If you just put into Google Carl Schwartz Noise GoFundMe, you'll find it, and people can support the effort there. This is critically important because you're right, the governor is overreaching, and you're describing in great detail the legal process that he is able to go through in order to do that. So what about the mandatory vaccination of people, just everybody in New York? I mean, they're already talking about it like it's a foregone conclusion. Will this action that you're taking have any impact on that?
Well, so we have just had that discussion as a team, as a litigation team that's working on this. That is being researched. It will probably be a separate legal action that gets brought. But I'll tell you, apart from the courts, people need to stand up. This whole idea that, well, it's what they say I'm supposed to do. You know what? Grow a brain. Get real. Find some fortitude. Stand up. You can't, they cannot force you to put stuff in your body. And like I say, Roe v. Wade, we have certain rights as people, and you need to stand up. You need to run your mouth. You need to not be quiet. People need to let people around them know that you do not agree with this stuff. You might be wearing a mask in a store because you're going to get arrested if you don't, or the store is going to get in trouble. I'm defending multiple stores right now as we speak for these types of things. So, a lot of us end up wearing the mask to protect the store owners, but we need to be talking. The people need to say, listen, we don't agree with this. This is not a new normal. We're not going to do this every fall because the pharmaceutical companies have found out how to name a COVID 2020, right? I mean, and then there's going to be a COVID 2021. It's going to be our new enemy, right? And our new savior is going to be the pharmaceutical companies coming up with a new vaccine every year. And so, these people, it's social engineering. They want to tell you how you're going to live and where you're going to go and what that's going to look like. Throw that off. Stand up. Patriots need to find their fortitude, find their voice, and just refuse.
Absolutely. And we're just about out of time here. I want to make sure we've covered everything you want to bring to everyone's attention. And certainly, Mr. Schwartz, you have an open invitation to return anytime there's a development or anything you want to share. Is there anything we haven't spoken about yet that you'd like to talk about before we go?
Well, just that our lawsuit is pretty broad. So it covers landlords that have been unable to evict tenants because the governor closed the courts for that. That has hurt a lot of people. I mean, there are elderly people that are selling their home as they've moved into nursing homes, assisted living places. They rely on that money, and it's just gone. There are business owners that are in trouble. They've held on as long as they can. And, our government's done a bailout, but it just gave the money away indiscriminately. It did not make the money go to the places where there was truly a loss in such a way that, businesses were then forced to go under. We're losing businesses every day now, right? So that's part of the lawsuit. Nursing homes is another one. They're trying to keep you out of the nursing home. You can't go see your loved one. Right. A nifty trick on that one. If they try to do that to you and you want to get in there to see a loved one, get a healthcare proxy for that person, and you tell them that the lawyer says they can't make medical decisions regarding your loved one without consulting with you. And so you need to come in and be able to consult regarding and see the person that you've got responsibilities for. And so that's important that you can go there. And then, we need to get back on stages. The idea that they've shut down New York's performance district in football stadiums and gymnasiums, right? I mean, we're at a point where, they can say, oh, the hospitals are overrun. I don't have doctors telling me that. We flattened this curve so hard back in April that it's flat. It's just totally flat. And they tell you it's overrun. It's not overrun. This thing is going to make its way through the populace until it's done what it's going to do. That's the reality. And you know, if you're feeble and want to stay home, or you want to wear the mask, great, go for it, do that. But you know, the rest of us, we want to live our lives, and this alternate form of living that they've created right now is not a form of life that a whole lot of people I know want to live. We feel like we're dead already if this is what life looks like in the new world order. So throw it off. If you've got a loss, call the lawyer. Let's make stuff happen here, and let's call our government leaders to account and get control of them and get our lives back.
You've just raised a really important point, because the basic idea that the mainstream media is trying to push, that in furtherance of these programs that Governor Cuomo is essentially the poster boy for, is that if you won't wear a mask and close your business and stay home, you're being selfish. But you're right. There's no interaction with people. We're all basically subsisting right now. I mean, you know, to the extent that people who still have a home and money to buy food, we can eat and things like that, but you can't interact, you can't go see your relatives. I haven't seen my family in 8 or 9 months. I think a lot of people are becoming very concerned about these different schemes that they have for some kind of health passport that's going to further restrict our access to travel, or even going to certain countries, even entering certain businesses. Isn't all of this in violation of HIPAA? The fact that a restaurant can take your temperature and ask you if you have a particular sickness, it all seems very strange.
Yeah, to me it does, and I'm no expert in that area of law, but I'll tell you what, that's why I threw Roe v. Wade at it. It's like, listen, you sit there and suggest that, you know, government's doing what it's within its purview, that, you know, we're protecting the public. Listen, if you're going to protect the public with emergency measures, you've got to show us, the public, we the people, or the courts, or the legislature, that there is an actual emergency that's ongoing that rises to a level where you would strip this many freedoms away from people. And some of those may even be illegal, you know, the medical stuff. But I don't see it. And my lawsuit demands that of the defendants. It's like, listen, you need to produce what evidence there is of actual emergencies. And they can't do it. You know, they've played with this math. They played with the numbers. Influenza now, they're starting to put, you know, whether it's COVID-19, influenza, now they're putting them all together. They're going to further try to obscure the truth of the numbers, and the truth of the numbers as they've proposed it. And this is where maybe he does get the Emmy, right? We've cured cancer. We've cured heart disease this year. We don't have any more people dying this year than we did last year, right? But nobody's dying of cancer and heart attacks in numbers like we used to, because we've played with the math. So I guess, you know what, I take it back. Maybe Cuomo deserves the Emmy. I mean, he was able to convince everybody that, you know, it's all COVID. So here we are.
Yeah, and this is just an excerpt from the letter received by a Crowdsource the Truth viewer, a FOIA request looking for evidence or records that would indicate the efficacy of wearing masks by the general public and the safety risks associated with it. But please be advised, after a diligent search, no records are available to indicate that. So, Mr. Schwartz, we're going to stay with you on this lawsuit and any new developments that come up. I really do encourage viewers of Crowdsource the Truth to visit the GoFundMe page and help support this effort. This is what we've been asking for and looking for the past several months. Lawyers with integrity and courage who are willing to stand up to the tyrants that are trying to steal our property, destroy our businesses, destroy our lives. I hope that people will support the normalization of in-school education campaign. And I want to thank my guest, Carl Schwartz, for joining me today. Mr. Schwartz, have a great night.
Thank you very much. You do the same.